Have you noticed something strange? You walk into any UK supermarket these days, buy the same items that you bought a few years ago, and somehow the bill is just dramatically higher. Even though inflation right now is supposedly falling, groceries still feel really expensive for most people. So what's really happening? Is it really inflation or supermarket pricing strategies, global supply shocks, or is it something deeper within the UK economy itself? Today, we are breaking down the real reasons why the UK supermarkets feel so expensive, using actual real life data, not just headlines. The first reason is actually pretty simple. The UK did experience one of the biggest food inflation shocks in decades. UK food price inflation peaked at around 19 to 20% year on year in March 2023, which was the highest level seen in over 45 years. And this is something that we can clearly see in the figures which have been published by the Office of National Statistics. Even today, many food categories remain significantly more expensive than they were literally just a few years ago. At the end of 2025, the average UK household is spending roughly 40% more on food than what they were in 2020. And while food price inflation did drop from its 19% peak in March 2023 to around 4 to 5% by late 2025, as we can clearly see, prices have not followed this trend and have not returned to pre-2022 levels, which means households today are spending more just to maintain the same volume of food that they had previously. More importantly, what that means is that food prices didn't just rise temporarily, they permanently reset to a much higher level. And I think this is a very key point which most people tend to underestimate, that even when inflation slows down, prices don't just fall back, they just rise more slowly, which actually means that the expensive baseline still remains. The second reason is more of a structural one. The truth is that the UK does depend really heavily on imported food. Roughly 46% of the food consumed in the UK is imported, making domestic grocery prices highly sensitive to things like exchange rates, global energy costs, and disruptions in the supply chain. And this is clearly evident in the report published on gov.uk. So when anything slightly troublesome happens, such as the weakening of the pound, rise in global shipping costs, or a spike in global food prices, the UK supermarkets feel the impact of these things much faster than many other countries globally. And I personally believe that this is one of the biggest long-term reasons that food costs in the UK feel permanently high, because the UK just simply cannot fully control global price shocks. Another key factor is the rising costs of running the actual supermarkets themselves. Because we have to remember, retailers are extremely energy intensive. Things like refrigeration, logistics networks, warehouses, and transport fleets all depend very heavily on things like electricity and fuel. And along with that, at the same time, labor costs have also risen quite significantly. Even something like the UK national living wage increased around 10% in April 2024, which resulted in a rise in operating expenses across the whole retail sector. And again, this is data we're taking directly from gov.uk. And these costs that we're talking about, they don't just stay inside these companies, they don't just absorb them all, they eventually show up as the prices that we finally see on the shelves. And I also think that this is another key point where many people tend to misunderstand inflation again, because it's not just raw food costs or the cost of raw materials that we have to consider, it's the entire supply chain becoming more expensive and having a domino effect down the line. Many people today tend to believe that supermarkets in the UK are massively increasing their profits. But the actual data shows a much more complicated picture, because the thing is, the UK grocery market is one of the most competitive markets in the whole world, and the major supermarket operating profit margins typically sit somewhere between 2 and 4%. And this is clear data according to investigations done by the Competitions Authority. So what this actually means is that most of the times, supermarkets raise prices just to keep up with the rising costs, not always necessarily to line their pockets or to have massive profit margins. And I believe this is the main reason why the grocery prices tend to stay very high even when the supermarkets themselves aren't making record margins, because the cost structure itself has shifted upward. So what exactly is shrinkflation? In simple terms, it's where the package size becomes smaller but the price remains the same, or sometimes the price goes up. Consumer watchdog Which has documented numerous UK grocery products which are reducing pack sizes while maintaining the prices, especially during the cost of living crisis. And sometimes, even if the shelf price that you see in the actual supermarket seems pretty stable, the price per gram is often increasing and it tends to escape under the radar. And I believe this is one of the most psychologically frustrating parts of modern grocery pricing, because people feel the impact on their pockets, but they don't always see the problem clearly in front of their eyes. So where do we go from here? What happens next? Will supermarket prices fall again? Unfortunately, the answer is probably not. Multiple factors such as global food prices, the volatility when it comes to climate-related harvesting, global energy markets, and the worldwide movements in currency all currently seem to suggest that the grocery prices are more likely to stabilize at the higher levels rather than returning to the good old days of pre-2020. But at the same time, that doesn't exactly mean that the prices will just keep exploding. But unfortunately, it does mean that the era of ultra cheap groceries is most likely finished and never coming back. So in conclusion, from what we have discussed so far, it's clear that the reason UK supermarkets feel so expensive isn't based on just a single factor. It's a combination of many different complex features: inflation shocks, dependency on imports, rising operational costs, and structural economic changes. And I believe that understanding all these factors is very important for all of us, because for any country, food prices are one of the clearest windows which you can peek through to see exactly how the wider economy is actually functioning. But with that being said, that's all from me for now, and do let me know in the comment section below which topic you'd like me to explore next. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, goodbye.